Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Praise be to Allah, the creator of his slave Jesus.
For years now, Islamophobes and Christian missionaries alike have perpetuated the myth that the Qur'an denies the miracles of the Prophet ﷺ, and that over 1,000 eyewitness reports of such miracles are but the product of mass fabrication from otherwise genuine historical witnesses. This is ridiculous and frankly insulting to the intellect. They attempt this by selectively stripping passages of the Qur'an from their proper context, mutilating it, and thus allowing themselves to confuse others with their deception and trickery. Let us investigate this issue. Their proofs are basically twofold. Firstly, the supposed silence of the Qur'an on miracles, and secondly, the supposedly numerous verses in the Qur'an which deny miracles. Before engaging with the second argument, let us first analyze the first. The Qur'an is not a biography of Muhammad ﷺ, but rather a set of revelations given to him. So, just because the Qur'an does not directly mention the numerous miracles, again, keeping in mind that it is not a detailed biography to begin with, it does not mean that it negates the miracles themselves, and the Qur'an ceases to mention his birth, the names of any of his wives, and many other details. Even if the Qur'an did not mention miracles, that is not enough to reject the testimony of the earliest biographies, as there is no contradiction, and the silence of the Qur'an is easily accounted for. Now, what about the missionary claim that the Qur'an denies miracles wholesale, meaning thoroughly? What verses do they cite? Well, missionaries like to misquote several, but 3 of these verses should suffice us to understand their bogus claims. The first verse, 183 from chapter 3, it reads, "Those are the same people who say, God has commanded us not to believe in any messenger unless he brings us an offering to be consumed by fire from the sky. Say, O Prophet, other prophets did in fact come to you before me, with clear proofs, and even what you demanded. Why then did you kill them, if what you say is true?" The second verse they misquote is verse 7 from chapter 13, which reads, "The disbelievers say, if only a sign could be sent down to him from his Lord. You, O Prophet, are only a warner, and every people had a guide." And the third verse being verse 59 from chapter 17, which reads, "Nothing keeps us from sending the signs, except that they had been denied by earlier peoples. And we gave Thamud the she-camel as a clear sign, but they wrongfully rejected it. We only sent the signs as a warning." To respond to these, we must note that the claim from missionaries is not that Muhammad ﷺ did not split the moon according to the Qur'an. Rather, the claim is that the Qur'an denies all miracles. We must ask them, do these verses contradict the miraculous feeding at his hands at the house of Jabir in Medina? Let's take a look. The first verse cited is merely a decline to do a specific miracle. It's not, in any way, a comprehensive rejection of miracles. The second verse is in Mecca and not Medina. This verse does not contradict any Medinan verse whatsoever. The third verse is speaking about the disbelievers alone, as believers would accept miracles. Further, the signs mentioned in this verse are warnings, but miracles done to believers are blessings. Further, it is, again, a Meccan verse and not a Medinan verse. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ ceasing from performing miracles does not in any way negate him from performing a multiplication of food and water in front of the believers in Tabuk. Thus, the skeptics have, at best, produced verses that can only deny Meccan miracles to disbelievers. This is it. They have failed to produce a reason why we should reject a Medinan miracle to the believers, like where he multiplied dates at the Battle of Khandaq. Now, to prove the Qur'an confirms miracles, with the Holy Messenger of God والسلام, we may use two verses which should suffice. The first verse being verse 118 from chapter 2, which states, "Those who have no knowledge say, if only Allah would speak to us, or a sign would come to us." The same was said by those who came before. Their hearts are all alike. Indeed, we have made the signs clear for people of sure faith. At the beginning of the verse, there is a challenge issued from the opponents to the Prophet ﷺ to produce a sign, ayah. And the response is that they have said the same thing previous nations have said, and that God had made the signs, ayat, plural of ayah, the same word used in the challenge, clear to people who know, that is, the believers. Missionaries have tried to get out of this by saying that the word for sign, ayah, used at the end of the verses, means a verse of the Qur'an, or natural signs, like the rising of the sun or designing in creation. The problem is earlier in the verse. The challenge was to produce a miracle, an ayah, and the response is that these signs were made clear to those who know, using the same word that meant miracle in the beginning part of the verse. Do they expect us to believe that the same word switch reference between the challenge and the response? The most natural and plain reading is thus that miracles have been requested by disbelievers, and the Qur'an responds by saying God already showed the miracles to the believers, as the same word is used for the request of the disbelievers and response to this request. It is only natural to understand that the meaning stays the same. This verse is also in Surah 2, a Medina chapter. This means that it comes after 13:7 and 17:59. Another issue for their position is 57:25, which reads, "Indeed, we sent our messengers with clear proofs, and with them we sent down scripture and the great balance of justice, so that people may administer justice. And we sent down iron with its great might, benefits for humanity, and means for Allah to prove who is willing to stand up for Him and His messengers without seeing it. Surely Allah is all-powerful and almighty." The argument from Muslims is that the clear proofs, bayyinat, in this context means physical miracles and does not include Quranic verses, and Muhammad ﷺ is one of the messengers talked about. The word bayyinat in the Qur'an refers to one of three things: natural signs, that is, design of the cosmos, verses of the Qur'an, and prophetic miracles like healing the sick. In this context, natural signs are clearly not in view, as they are there regardless of messengers ﷺ being sent or not. Clear proofs, bayyinat, also cannot mean verses of the Qur'an, as the verse distinguishes clear proofs from the book. Thus, the only plausible meaning is miracles. As for if Muhammad ﷺ is in view here, well, of course he is. He is a messenger after all, and even more. 57:28, but 3 verses later, calls him as such. 57:27 is a Medinan verse, and Surah Al-Hadid is one of the later chapters of the Qur'an. Thus we have seen that, for the sake of argument and brevity, Christians, with their baseless methodology, can deny Meccan miracles, yet they cannot deny miracles wholesale, as we have clear Medinan verses that plainly imply miracles happening. It is important that our viewers understand that even Meccan miracles are not denied, and that these verses are always in the context of denying miracles to the ungrateful disbelievers who would not believe even if they saw them. We end with a quote from one of the Gospels, which perfectly highlights the hypocrisy of these missionaries. Then some of the Pharisees and teachers of the law said to him, "Teacher, we want to see a sign from you." He answered, "A wicked and adulterous generation asks for a sign, but none will be given it except the sign of the prophet Jonah." Matthew 12:38-39. Notice how the wicked Pharisees demand a miracle, as do the believers of the Qur'an, And Jesus responds by saying none of his wicked generation will receive a sign except for the one of Jonah. This, through their methodology, should be enough proof that Jesus is denying all miracles except for the sign of Jonah, which would mean other miracles, such as the feeding of the 5,000 and the raising of the dead, should all be seen as gospel fabrications. Obviously, no Christian is going to affirm this, and rather, they will begin trying to explain the context, even though this verse is much clearer in scope than any Quranic verse they bring, but will refuse to do the same for the Qur'an.
وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين.